Good afternoon. That was Penny Dreadful. This is John Logan. He's slightly worried about the word masterclass, which he thinks suggests something rather stern.
Genial discussion.
Yeah.
Genial discussion.
Yeah. We're just going to have a bit of a chat with a few clips, and then you'll ask a few questions. But John you just come from Ireland, where you're preparing to start Series 3 of Penny Dreadful. He also, though, and we'll talk about some of the other work as it does, there is some overlaps I want to talk about, has written many movies, including Skyfall, Gladiator, The Aviator, Hugo, and several stage plays, including Red and Peter and Alice, that have been seen in Britain so far, and there are others. So I want to start with the idea of scale and scope in all these things, because in terms of the opportunity you have for narrative and character, the fashionable stage play these days is 90 to 100 minutes, no interval, and you've done some of those. Films, you have to get permission if you want to go over 2 hours or so. But TV, it is the astonishing thing. You've got, I think you're, 18 hours now, and then 27 by the end of the next series. Potentially could be 80, 90, 100. Do you think about that? When you start out, are you thinking about that massive canvas?
I was, because this is, Penny Dreadful is my first TV show, which is why it's my first baby step into television, which is why I do disclaim Masterclass, because I am still desperately learning it. This is our 3rd season, but my attraction to it was novelistic, was clearly as a writer, because I'd spent 30 years as a dramatist. I wrote my first play when I was 18, dealing with a 2-hour block, either on stage or on screen, more or less a 2-hour block. And I'm just fanatical about 19th century novels. And I love Dickens and Thackeray, and I wanted to write something of length, of scope. And so the challenge to myself as a dramatist was, could I find a story or characters that I felt would be interesting or amusing for that length of time? And I thought about the idea of Penny Dreadful for about 10 years before I finally pitched it. And for me, once I thought of the character of Vanessa Ives, who Ava Green plays, I thought, well, I could turn that character for a few years.
And you and Sam Mendes both came out of Skyfall, or had been on Skyfall. Was it connected with that experience from working together?
It only in the happenstance of I was seeing Sam every day, because I knew, I wanted to go into my first series with a colleague, with someone I completely trusted at my side, who's experienced and very solid. And my relationships as a dramatist have always been with directors. And I've known Sam for 20 years through theater circles. So one day on the Skyfall set, I said, I want to have dinner and talk about something. And I sort of pitched him the idea, and he liked it.
And being a showrunner is this term that is very particular to TV. In theatre, I suppose, the director is the showrunner, possibly the producer on Broadway, who knows. On a movie, Skyfall, well, Sam wasn't the showrunner, was he? I suppose the Broccoli's are, but in TV, there is this thing, now you're doing it, what does it mean to you to be a showrunner?
Well, the best quote I've heard about showrunning is the great David Mamet, who said, writing a movie is like running a marathon, and being a showrunner is like running a marathon until you die. And I can say, yes, that is exactly what it is. It's very all-consuming and very exciting because of that, because finally, I am Captain Kirk sitting in the big chair. And what the Enterprise does is the orders I give. And for better or worse, Penny Dreadful is my show. And sometimes it's for better, and sometimes it is for worse. Because I believe when you make a pact with an artist, which is what Showtime and Sky did, you make a pact with all of that artist, including their shortcomings, including their blind spots. And I know what my blind spots are as a dramatist, I think. I think I'm learning what my blind spots are as a producer.
This is too tantalizing. So tell us, first of all, as a dramatist, what are your blind spots?
The monologue, the too many words. It's because I grew up as a playwright. The reason I'm sitting here with you today is because of Shakespeare, and because specifically Hamlet. And I'm drawn toward language. I love language. And theater is, the coinage of the realm in a theater is language. It's not spectacle, it's not image, it's not even idea, it's language. And one of the reasons I love television is because you can have long scenes. You can have long dialogue scenes. And I think my tendency is to maybe fall into that a little too much. But, I correct it bit by bit.
And your blind spots as a showrunner?
Impatience, I think, with the process. And what I find disorienting, and the biggest surprise I had going into it, was not as a writer, but as a producer, was the sense of sort of temporal shift that takes place. Because when you're doing a play or a movie, it's a very normal process. Like, you write, you go into rehearsals, you go through production, and you're done. And it's all a temporal consistency. But in television, you go into production, and then suddenly you're editing the first 2 episodes, while you're filming episodes 3 and 4, while you're in pre-productions for episodes 6 and 7. That was wildly disorienting to me, because you have to give complete attention and you have to give your heart to every part of that process. So when you're in the editing room, you have to absolutely give your heart to that. And then 2 minutes later, you have to walk out onto a set, talk to Ava Green and Rory Kinnear, and completely give your heart to that. And then meet with the director and talk about a script, and a question they have about a scene. And that took me a while just to become agile. And I believe I have, and it also taught me the importance of delegating, of realizing I can't do it all. And thank God I have a great crew around me that I can turn to and give things to.
Although some showrunners, as you know, do even more of it, because they direct as well. I mean, Mamet did, and
Right.
many other people have. Jed Mercurio does, lots of people. And you have avoided that, or you're not going to.
No, it's not my gift. It's not my. I mean, I can't. I've worked with. The first 3 directors I worked with were Oliver Stone, Ridley Scott, and Ang Lee, followed by Marty Scorsese, Michael Mann, Sam Mendes, Gore Verbinski. These are people who are born to direct. And when I first started talking about this show, my best friend in LA is Catherine Bigelow, who's a great director, and she said, are you going to direct? And I said, no. And she said, why? This is a perfect opportunity. You learn how to do it. It's your words, it's your shows, your actors. And I said, I wouldn't know how to film this conversation. I wouldn't know where to put a camera to tell a story. It's just not my gift.
Writer, producer, showrunners I've spoken to, they've divided in my experience. Some say that they separate themselves out. They just write the script, and then as a producer they think, can we do this? And others do it the other way. They think, I want to write that scene, but as a producer, I know we can't. I know we can't afford it. I know it won't work. So it's an obvious question for you. But how does that work for you? Do you separate them out?
It's I've learned to do that when I'm dealing with the screen. Whether the big screen or the little screen from very early on. And it was the lesson. One of the great lessons taught to me by Ridley Scott when I was working on Gladiator, which was my second screenplay, and I was really just learning the form. And there's a scene where Maximus arrives, Russell Crowe in the movie, arrives in Rome, and I wrote a little sort of like exterior, hillside. The slave wagon goes over, we see Rome in the distance, and Ridley said, that's a $100,000 shot you just wrote. And so I've learned working on very big movies that you have to, as you write, be aware. Just be aware. Don't limit, but be aware. And so next season, season 3, which we're about to start filming on Friday, is actually huge in scope, much larger than the first 2 seasons, but I think I wrote it with an awareness of the logistics of how we might possibly do it.
And so, not wanting to be a director, but the other side of that is, on many shows there are many teams of writers, but you have always on this wanted to, in a rather English tradition, British tradition, wanted to write all of it.
Yeah.
And that will remain the case.
This season I brought in 2 writers to help share the burden, because writing, I've written 18 hours of it, I've written the majority of this next season, but I just need new ideas, and fresh young minds, because I have one point of view on these characters, and what I hope I have created is characters with a bit of tensiveness to them, and that other people can approach them from different directions, and so I wanted to see that happen. So I brought 2 great young writers in, and they've been working. It's been fantastic.
Well, we're going to talk about character for a bit now. We've got a little clip, which is Ava Green talking about her character, and that should lead us in. So we'll talk about Vanessa, that character, in a moment, but the thing that has gone across your work, I think, is given characters, historical or fictional characters from elsewhere. But it's there right across because it's there in The Aviator, it's there in Red, which is about Mark Rothko, Peter and Alice, which is about for people who haven't seen it, about the real-life models for the characters of Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan. So that is something that you and obviously, I mean, we have Frankenstein, we have Dorian Gray and others, conveniently out of copyright, conveniently, these characters. But you do, it's something you like to do. You like to use.
I do. I'm nuts about history, and I always have been. And I rarely read, despite a lovely conversation about fiction. I rarely actually read fiction. I read poetry, I read drama, and I read history. And I've always been. My first play was about the Leopold and Loeb case in Chicago, and I love researching. I like getting in and finding facts and letting things emerge. And if we were having a festival of Shakespeare, I would probably opt to watch the histories. Beyond the occasional Hamlet or Lear or Othello. And I find it very exciting and inspiring to play in history. And also, for me, anathema, death, will be writing the same thing. And so to be able to go in a space of 2 years from writing Skyfall to Penny Dreadful to a play set in the early 1920s in London is joyous, because it allows me to indulge my affection for language and different ways of speech and different worlds. And that to me makes it fun. It makes it challenging, because I'm not writing the same thing again and again, and sort of keeps me inspired.
And you mentioned Shakespeare a couple of times. It always fascinates me, this, because a lot of English writers get quite angry about Shakespeare for the obvious reason that all the great plays have already been written and they're not going to write them. But I'm consistently with people in American television, the number of times, the makers of Breaking Bad told me that what we're constrained to call the Scottish play here was very specifically behind that. I mean, the guy who gets partially involved and then gets more and more so. Yeah. So it is, but for you it is, Shakespeare is what Lenny Henry calls old shaky, is a big thing. Absolutely.
I mean, it's the bust in my office of Shakespeare. Because that's how I started. When I was 8, I saw Olivier's Hamlet on TV. My dad said, sit down and watch this movie, and I didn't want to, and I did, and it changed my life. I mean, it was that afternoon in San Pedro, California, when I was 8, made me who I am, because I was so excited by this thing I didn't understand, that it had a great sword fight, it had ghosts, it had this language I didn't understand, it had all these layers that I thought was amazing. And my father, God love him, encouraged that, and said, let's read some Shakespeare together. So we would read the plays with lots of sword fights, and I just became fanatical about Shakespeare, and that was it. And then I just said, I want to be part of that thing, which for me was the theatre.
And also, as many academics have pointed out, it's filmic Shakespeare in the sense that he breaks what are now the rules of stage writing. If he just wants to go to a different country for the next scene, he just goes, doesn't he?
Yeah, Shakespeare would have been the world's greatest showrunner. Because he had to put asses on seats at the Globe. He partly owned the theater. He churned out material. He borrowed material. He stole plots. And he wrote the greatest drama ever that the public adored. And we are, it's for all the complexity that we can speak about our art form as a writer or a producer or a showrunner or a creator. I'm an entertainer. That's my job. That's what it'll say on my tombstone. If I fail at that, then nothing else matters. And Shakespeare, the reason we still celebrate Shakespeare is because he was the consummate entertainer, not because he was a consummate poet or thinker or even dramatist, but he entertained us in a way that is still riveting all these years later.
And you mentioned seeing Shakespeare when you were 8, but Penny Dreadful also, which you said, I mean, that comes out of the same period, the kind of things that you were reading and seeing.
Yeah, well, Dickens, I mean, a lot of Dickens, and the 10-year genesis of the show began with Wordsworth, with reading a lot of romantic poetry and becoming sort of obsessed with Wordsworth and Byron and Shelley and Keats, and eventually going back to read Frankenstein, the original, Mary Shelley. And I read, her original draft, the revised draft, which Percy Shelley may have been involved in, and getting really excited about Gothic literature and about those ideas. And I'm thinking, do I want to do a Frankenstein story? Realizing there was something there that was really compelling to me that I didn't understand, that I wanted to sort of understand. That became the way of working through it. And the why television is Dickens. You finish a chapter in Dickens, you have to read the next one. And it's the greatest pulp drawing you through a story. And I thought that's something that all the greats of Gothic literature shares.
Although the mix of genres in Penny Dreadful is that you have, I mean, you go from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to Universal horror movies, Hammer horror, I mean, it's kind of all there. So it's a mixture of those. I mean, I'm not making a quality judgment, but from high literature to
Oh no, my
popular
God,
culture,
yes.
it's all there.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's like in the ideal episode of Penny Dreadful, we'll be quoting Keats, and we'll be slaughtering characters, and that's the ideal episode. That's why it's called Penny Dreadful, because it has the aspiration is to provoke, is to entertain, is to draw people into an alien world, but it's a poetic world, and the most satisfying things to write for me, are the scenes with Vanessa and the creature, because they're the most soulful. And when I thought to write the series in the first place, I wanted to write a story about faith, because people don't comment on this because you have Frankenstein, you have cool stuff to talk about, but the significant act of Penny Dreadful is it's a deeply Catholic woman who loses her faith. You meet a woman who is a deep Catholic. At the end of the second season, she loses her faith and burns her cross. And in the third season, the new season, it's what do you do when you've lost your faith and you are rootless? And I always imagined this 3-year story about a woman who has to make her way without her God. So that's always playing through it, but.
And then we saw Ava Green talking about her character, and that was the structuring of it. So it was a mixture of found characters, or borrowed characters, as it were, and then invented.
Yeah, exactly. And I started with Vanessa Ives, who Ava plays, and I thought about what characters could come into that to help tell that story, which is a story about alienation, for me, about alienation, accepting sort of the beast within. And Frankenstein and the creature seemed obvious for that. Dorian Gray seemed to slide into that, and so that they were sort of drawn into her orbit. All the characters were sort of drawn into the orbit of that character for me.
You've also you've made the connection, because it's no coincidence that Oscar Wilde's two most enduring pieces of work, which are Dorian Gray and The Importance of Being Earnest, are both about people pretending to be other people and leading double lives and secret lives and shadow lives and all the rest of it. And that, it's pretty clear that came from him being gay, particularly at that time. But you have made that connection.
Oh, totally. So someone asked me, after manfully resisting television for 25 years of a somewhat successful career, why do it? And I said, I wanted to write my coming out story. I wanted to write about being gay, which for me, I realized I was gay. It was in sort of the mid-70s, and it was just not cool if you're if you're from New Jersey, in the mid-70s and you're gay, and you didn't know anyone who was gay, and it was. I felt monstrous because of it. I felt unlike my friends and my family. And yet I knew it's who I was, and I would go into New York to see plays, and I'd sneak down to the Village, and I'd walk around when the Village was truly the Village, and a frightening place. And then I realized part of me belonged here, and this, I had a resonance to this thing, and I grappled with that, and so when I thought about the largest possible version of Penny Dreadful, and characters who feel different, and yet realize there's power in that difference, that's where Vanessa Ives came from, because she's a twisted chick, she's intense, she's sort of possessed by the devil, Dracula's hunting her, it's like she's got this thing inside her that also empowers her, which is why I wanted to make the show about a woman, because a woman in 1892 was not an empowered creature. She was literally and figuratively corseted, she had to wear gloves, so I thought it was just a good metaphor for exploring my own coming to accept the beast, if you will, within me.
And you've made the comparison with serial form in TV and the way Dickens wrote. The difference was that Dickens, unless he died, which he did, of course, while writing The Mystery of Edwin Drood, but unless he died, he was going to get to finish them. In TV, there is this tension. You meet people on the stairs here who tell you what the next series would have been if it hadn't been cancelled. These days you go to
both my
Netflix.
bosses are in the audience, so perhaps we can address that to them.
But you, that's something, you're aware of that when you start out. You may not get to tell all these stories.
Of course, absolutely. And that, that's why each of the seasons for me has a sense of completeness to it. And I want it to be ongoing because I love the characters so much. But, you fight, in the entertainment industry, you fight every second for every bit of attention. Whether you're doing a James Bond movie or a tiny little play, downstairs in a pub, you're fighting for people's hearts every second. And I realize that's what we're doing every second in Penny Dreadful. And sometimes we win and sometimes we lose. But you have to fight it sincerely in any case.
And Frankenstein, it is an astonishing thing, isn't it? The resonance of that story, written by a young woman after a bad dream. And
Yeah.
it is amazing. I mean, it's people have counted them up, and I mean, there are hundreds of different versions of it.
It is, and if you've not read the original Mary Shelley Frankenstein, you'll be staggered by how different it is. And one of the things I'm most proud of in Penny Dreadful is I believe our version of the creature, played by the amazing Roy Kinnear, is the closest I've ever read to what Mary Shelley wrote. Which is, the one thing the creature is eloquent. He is so eloquent in that book. He will break your heart, and he's provocative. And the great provocation or challenge of Frankenstein is, who's the monster? Is it the creature, or is it Victor Frankenstein, who's created this thing and has no responsibility or sense of paternity for this life he's created? And so being able to dramatize that with such a great actor has been very, very fulfilling, and I hope true in a way to the spirit of Mary Shelley.
And a lot of that literature that you're drawing on, it is the extraordinary thing, the resonance of these metaphors, because it's there with Dorian Gray. In fact, Ireland, where you're working, they'll occasionally say about a politician, sure, he's got a picture in the attic, and that, and people say that, and that's there, and then the Frankenstein. But the power of that metaphor of things getting out of the control of their creating, which applies to so much in science, politics, perhaps even culture, who knows?
Yeah, but and also the idea that we all have secrets. We all have a picture in the attic, and don't kid yourself that you don't. You know, you must be. Someone does definitely. You know, and if anything, Penny Dreadful is about sort of celebrating that. Whether you keep the portrait in the attic or whether you walk down Piccadilly, you know, displaying it. It's about saying there is strength in the secret. There is strength in the forbidden. You don't have to be prosaic. You don't have to be heterosexual, domestic, handsome. You don't have to be any of that. You just need to be uniquely and firmly who you are.
Well, in this session, we're trying to take you behind the scenes. We have done verbally. We're now going to see a clip where we go behind a particular scene. The making of the Blood Ball. Now, to generalise, again, having talked to a lot of writers, I find with amazing set-piece scenes, sometimes it comes to them when they're jogging or in the supermarket, and then they write towards that moment or vision. Other times they're writing a script and they realise the script is heading towards that scene. What was it in this case? Did you always know you were going to do this?
Yeah, I'm a pretty methodical planner. You know, I don't rely on inspiration ever. Frankly, you know, it's like I'm a great believer in outlines and notes and figuring it out. And you know, I looked at that shape of the season. And I said, we need to bring everyone together, you know, because that's so exciting for the audience, exciting for us to have everyone. So all the roads had to lead to a place. And I knew I wanted to employ dance as sort of a metaphor last season. So I thought, all right, so Dorian will hold a ball. And then I realized what it all had to be and all come together. But it was the most logistically, we shot it for 6 days. It was a huge thing. And again, it's total credit to the departments for doing it.
No, absolutely. But it's a very good example of the thing that I asked earlier on, which is that as a writer, was part of you thinking, how the fuck are they going to do this? Or do you just trust that they will be able to?
I trust that they'll be able to. You know, and there have been things that we've realized we couldn't do, and so we had to make allowances and do things differently for budget or scheduling. But we're very agile, we're very able over there in Ardmore figuring things out.
And visually, do you ever make little sketches yourself, or do you just rely entirely on words?
No,
to
yeah. No.
But do you see it visually very fiercely?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, and I think my scripts try to lay that out in a way that it's not onerous to someone reading it, to a production designer, or director. So it's saying do this, but I try to suggest the emotion and the feel of absolutely everything. But that comes from a lot of action movies, of writing a lot of action, you know, and from my first movie, which was a movie called Any Given Sunday, and a lot of football games in it. Oliver Stone, you have to be very, very specific about things. So I'm very specific about action. And that's by far the hardest thing to write.
Although some directors, it's well known, delight in ignoring what the writer...
Some actors do as well.
Yeah. But if the screenplay says the camera is high, they think no.
Well, I never say that. I would never, my screenplays, I never say close up or camera does this. I try to lead the viewer through the experience. So if I'm envisioning this, I would say there's a beautiful, pristine glass of water like a glacier. A hand picks it up. The hand is old, you know, or whatever. You know, rather than saying close up on glass, because to me no one can read that and lose themselves in the story. And I have
also,
to.
People have directors, doesn't it?
Oh, exactly right. And it's like I want a great director to see that glass differently than I'm imagining it, because I'm not a director.
And we're just going to look at something, as an example of a particular episode. Something that to me seems to come into TV, particularly in the last few years, is the episode that breaks the chronology or goes back to the origin story or flashbacks. And we've had many, many examples of this recently. A whole episode will be a flashback of the origin story. And you have an example of this, and this was the trailer. And it's clear, it's not entirely new thing, but it's right back to MASH, 30-something, there'd be a black and white episode or a mock documentary.
A very special episode of.
Yes, yeah. But it seems to me increasingly part of the grammar of television now. You can break the narrative arc and do that kind of episode.
Yeah. Well, that's also for me part of the fun, and part of the challenge of the show. Like, my favorite TV show is Murder, She Wrote, and I like watching every week Angela Lansbury is going to solve a crime, and that's very comforting for me. I wouldn't want to write Murder, She Wrote, and I think Penny Dreadful is a show that should surprise the audience and should take chances in the way it tells its story. And like I said, I very self-indulgently, I'm obsessed with Vanessa Ives. I want to know what her life is, what created this woman with all these demons. And so for me, going back and finding that I am interested, I would hope the audience is interested as well. And it allows us to do something different. So, when an audience tunes in for Penny Dreadful, I hope they don't quite know what's coming. It's not going to be Angela Lansbury solving a crime by the end. It's going to be something you don't quite expect.
It's an interesting hypothetical, isn't it? Because if Murder, She Wrote were on now, do you think the audience is sophisticated enough that you could suddenly have an episode in which she was a young girl, the origin story? Yeah,
probably. I think so. I think, and perhaps even demand it now, because TV audiences are so sophisticated.
Sam Mendes, we mentioned him at the beginning. He's obviously a very busy man and all the rest of it. So how does it work? Because you are the showrunner, but does he have any input now?
Well, we talk every now and then. We usually about the shape of the season, sort of what I'm planning, major casting decisions. We'll talk through. I'm happy to say he's busy working on Spectre now, so I don't want to bother him.
No, fine. And that is because in some movies, it's not entirely clear who wrote what, because other writers are brought in, and there's all that kind of stuff. That, again, is presumably the attraction of this, is that TV shows can be taken off people. They have been, but it's less likely, isn't it?
Yeah, that wasn't my attraction, because I'm a playwright. When I wake up in the morning, I'm really a playwright more than anything. And when you're a playwright, the authorial voice is everything. So all my if it's ego or if it's authorial pride, it's fully satisfied in the theatre.
We'll just set out for younger writers who may not know that. So basically, the way it works in theatre, they cannot contractually they can't change anything.
And nor would.
Nor would, quite. And then film is the exact opposite, where
they change everything.
They do change everything. And then TV is sort of somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, but what I found so great about TV, and this is I'm going to my third year, so I haven't been doing this for 20 years, is how much I've learned. And I've got to give credit to Showtime and Sky and the people there who give notes, notes on cuts, notes on things I wouldn't even think about in terms of what television is. And best piece of advice, and I always credit David Nevins, my boss from Showtime, who's here, for giving me the single best piece of advice about what TV is. Because when we were first talking about the show, he knew I had lots of ideas and great characters and very solid scripts, but I think he sensed I didn't quite understand what television was, and correctly. And he said something very simple that clarified a lot for me, which is he said, all great TV shows, in a way, are about a family. And I thought, that's true, whether it's the Brady Bunch, or the crew of the Enterprise, or Jessica Fletcher and her friends in Cabot Cove.
Or Breaking Bad, or The Sopranos.
Exactly.
It's interesting, or The West Wing.
That had never quite occurred to me in relation to Penny Dreadful, and it forced me to think differently about bringing the characters together. So in the first season, you meet these disparate characters, and then by the end, they're really bonded. And then in the second season, which just aired, they go through and they sort of shatter. So the third season is what happens to this family now that they've shattered apart. But that was very important for me to realize, and they've been both Showtime and Sky, very patient with my learning curve on TV.
And when you're, clearly working on Penny Dreadful has changed the way you write TV, but from the experience of it, but when you're writing theatre or film, are you conscious of it having changed you as a writer?
No. And I think, the demands of writing for our television are different, but my writing's exactly the same. As far as I wake up, I do the same thing.
And a discussion that has often happened over the decades at this festival is hierarchies, whether TV is inferior or superior to film. And it's a very real discussion in cultures, I think. Do you have a view of that?
No, I have a preference, but I think art is art, and entertainment and provocation and amusement, sexiness, horror. I can be riveted watching King Lear. I can be riveted watching Breaking Bad. I can be riveted watching a movie. It makes no difference just what you want to put down your money for.
There does seem to be less snobbery though in terms of actors and directors. I mean, there was a time when people wouldn't do TV because it was assumed that you were on the skids, whereas that's gone, hasn't it?
Completely.
Yeah. Which is
nice.
Yeah. And at this stage, going into the third season, so tell us the sort of highs and lows in your mind as a showrunner. What are you worrying about at the moment?
One casting piece, something to cast. In the larger sense, I'm hoping the structure will work. Because it's a sort of bold structure next season. I think it will work. It works on paper. But once we get the episodes in, it's I guess how it will all edit together. Because our stories sort of spread out, and how the mosaic and the sort of structure will all work. We have some logistical challenges as well.
And the fact that we've talked through this about episodes and seasons, which to some people is the old-fashioned way of talking about TV, because the other way is to just is drop the whole lot on one day as they do on Netflix or whatever. Do you remain in that sense an old-fashioned TV person?
I do. I mean, it's to me, Star Trek Next Generation is a certain channel, 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, and I'm used to that's because I'm a dinosaur. But when people ask me, should I watch the show or should I binge watch the show? I say, if you want to binge watch it over a weekend, fantastic, because that's how I wrote it. Because to me, it's a great big rush of next season's 9 hours that all belong together, and we take such time and attention to making sure all the little pieces add up. And the filaments and the connections and the tendrils should be interesting. And something that happens in episode 2 should resonate here and resonate here. And there's an artistry and a care to it that I think benefits from, okay, I'm going to really sort of treat this like, do I want to read Bleak House over a month or over a week?
But there are quite big structural decisions, right, aren't they? Particularly in the first minutes of an episode. Because I know young people who only binge watch box sets or stream TV, and they get irritated by the amount of recapping at the beginning of the second and third episode. Right. But you do have to think about that, because a whole part of TV writing, which doesn't apply in stage or in movies, was getting them back.
Tune in next week. And that's been a big discussion we've had about this new season, and a lot of the revisions I've been doing in the scripts, including the 2 you just got, are actually about that, are about pulling an audience through, because it's the muscle I have yet to really perfect, because it's you're going to a play, the curtain comes up, you watch it, the curtain comes down. People aren't usually going to walk out.
Well, you have to get them back after the interval.
At the interval.
That's why everyone does
one act plays. Exactly.
Yeah.
But so I'm still learning the idea of momentum, and pulling people in, and cliffhangers, and not being a hoard of that, not being vulgar about it, but being aware of it. And it's still an ongoing process for me.
And it's striking to me that even the Netflix shows and others that are dropped in a kind of streamed block, they still maintain that episode division, the idea of a season. I mean,
I think chapters is a nice thing. It's like a book. I like when I get to the end of chapter 4, I can either turn off the light and go to bed, or like, do I really want to keep reading? There's something comforting for me in that.
And you mentioned delivering a couple of scripts. So have you done all of them, everything for season 3? Almost. Yeah. How almost?
8 of 9.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, to what I know, it's in the hands.
We're just starting filming Friday. I'm not thinking beyond that.
No, but it's in the hands of those. But you must, in terms of the art, I mean, do you have a sense of how long, all other things being equal, and your boss in the audience, how long?
No, I envisioned 3 years. I envisioned a particular story. So in a way, that's sort of what's exciting about if we get a season 4 is it would be new. It would be very different.
And actors, because we've mentioned Rory Kinnear, you had Simon Russell Beale in the. Was any of it written specifically for actors?
I wrote The Creature for Rory very specifically because I admired his work so much. I knew him from Sky. I'd seen him in theater for 15 years, and I just thought he was the most extraordinary actor, and I wanted someone with that poetry and that heart to play the creature. And Vanessa Ives is Ava Green. It's just, there's, you know, I will say she's my muse. And first thing I do every day on the lot, every morning, starting with tomorrow morning and Friday and every morning, is I go see her. And we just check in and we talk about things because she inhabits that character so fully. She's the only actor who gets the scripts ahead of time. We talk about everything. You know, I'm deep. This show to me is a dance with Ava Green.
Questions from the audience. If you could identify yourself, even if you're fantastically well known, or think you are, it just helps other people who may, for some reason, not know you. Yes, gentleman there. And we got microphones, so just wait for those.
Hi there, my name's Connor, I work with the BBC. I just want to ask John, out of all the stuff you've worked on, what's all the scripts you've worked on, playwrights, TV, film, etc. Just want to ask, what's the most challenging project you've written and why?
The Aviator, which is a movie I wrote for Marty Scorsese, because it's about Howard Hughes. Because the sheer research, it was 5 years of research of figuring out a way into the story. Because it was the frustration of knowing there's a great story here in Howard Hughes. In fact, there's 20 great stories in Howard Hughes. Which one do I want to tell? That was very challenging.
And people write in a number of genres. Michael Frayn, who writes stage plays and novels, he said that people say, why did you decide to write it as that? And he said the idea arrives as a novel.
Exactly right.
But that's the same for you.
Exactly right.
With something like Peter and Alice, it wouldn't be, should this be a film, should
Never.
this be staged?
I've never, ever in my life, in 30 years I've been doing this, had any question about should something be a film or a play or now a television thing.
And that is just because it's to do, the form and content has somehow matched.
Completely. Yeah. And you know, theater allows you a certain luxuriousness of expression that the other forms don't. And some ideas, some metaphors lend itself, you know, to theater, I think.
Yes, the lady just behind. Can we get the microphone across there? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rachel, I'm a freelance runner. I was just wondering, when you were pitching the show, if the failure of a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen caused any difficulties?
No, this was a great pitch. It was, you know, Sam Mendes and I went in and talked to David Nevins, head of Showtime, because I really wanted it on Showtime. That's where I wanted to go. And David really loved the idea, loved the, you know, the concept and the idea right from the beginning.
What was the pitch?
The pitch, I can't remember whether it was scripts or just a pitch, but it was sort of, you know, it was sort of kind of what the show is, which is there's this woman and these are the people around her, and some of them are famous literary characters, but it was, you know, it was a pitch about the themes and the emotion. It was never about the plot. It was never about the monsters. You know.
So I just worried with my eyesight. If there's anyone in the back, so wave. Okay, we'll stay with, they're all in front of me. We'll take that one and then the lady behind.
Jen Pinkney from UKTV. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on what changed in the industry to make film actors come into television, because they're everywhere now.
The paucity of film work. I mean, film work is drying up. I mean, you know, when I started out, the major studios were doing 30 movies a year, and now they're doing 5. And the majority of big budget movies, you know, which is serious bread and butter for actors, are stupid superhero movies. And so the middle ground of movies where I lived, where you know the Scorsese, the middle Scorsese movies, those sorts of movies don't exist anymore. And I think gradually television, the artistry of television, you know, from you know whatever point you want to mark it, you know, I would say my experience probably The Sopranos, where something came along that people said, oh, and they paid attention in a different way, also made it sort of more legitimate for actors, I would say.
And also, in terms of Penny Dreadful, it seems there's a certain kind of actors, Simon Russell Beale is an example, who, despite being, or perhaps because of being one of the greatest classical actors that we've had, has not had that many opportunities on screen, and that's one of the things you're able to do.
Yeah, and one of the great joys of Penny Dreadful, maybe in a way the greatest joy for me, quite honestly, but just truly, is actors I've admired for years, like Rory Kinnear, Simon Russell Beale, Helen McCrory, Doug Hodge, I get to write for. And I get to say to America, you don't know Rory Kinnear, you don't know Simon Russell Beale, let me introduce you. You know, because these are people who changed my life and made me cry and made me laugh for 20 years.
Yes, maybe there, yeah. Just get the microphone across.
Hi, my name is Michelle Cass, I'm a literary agent. it's a self-indulgent question because I'm bursting with curiosity. You've spoken so articulately about your passion for language and your influences. What's written on your arms?
Oh, all right, very good. This is Desert Wolf, which is kanji because I want a coyote because of my great passion in life is hiking in the desert. And this is a quote from Shelley, and it's from the poem To Jane an Invitation, and it is, "Awake, arise, and come away to the wild woods and the plains."
Yes, any more? Please don't be shy. Go towards you. Yes, a hand has gone up there. We'll just get the microphone across to the middle.
Sorry, Barry Ryan from Warp Films. You talked about your history with theatre and film, and there's obviously a different technique to writing something that's contained within 2 hours to something that's like the first season's spread over 8 hours, and also so you're writing 8 stories or 8 hours that have got to be contained in that hour, and then an editor comes along and a director comes along and will go, actually, do you know what, in episode 3 it'd be much better if we bring that up to episode 1. Did you have experience of that, or
yeah, oh, no, absolutely.
Stay close to you?
Which was great, because one of the scenes I was explaining earlier, one of the reasons we could afford to film Penny Dreadful, because it's a very expensive show and it looks very expensive, and that requires time and money, is because most of the scripts are written before we start filming. So you really can look at the sweep of it. It helps structurally as a writer, because you can say, and we have done, the scene that you're starting episode, like this very season, the scene you're starting episode 5 with, maybe that should go at the end of episode 4. And so it allows you to do things like that, which are great. And I'm not precious about my work at all. I'm precious about lines that I like, and speeches, and poetry. I'm not precious about structure, and so moving things around is very helpful. Whether it's from a network, an editor, a director, I'm always very helpful. I'm very grateful for the ideas of shifting structure around. Never bothers me at all.
But you said that you don't want to direct, but there must have been times with directors across the media in which you resent or reject what they've done, something you've written.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that?
Well, it depends. It's like, look, when they hire you to write a big movie, the essence is they own it. It's not your property. When you write a play, it's your property. I feel Penny Dreadful is my property, even though I don't own it. I feel a sense of great authorship of it. And it's just a compromise you make. But I've been very well treated by directors. And I learned how to do what I do both as a playwright and as a screenwriter, working with directors and collaborating with directors. And it's still the greatest joy I have, is sitting with a director and talking about a scene or a script, whether it's Michael Grandage or Joe Mantello or Sam on stage, or any of our Penny Dreadful directors, or Ridley Scott. That's the great joy I have in life. So seeing how a director takes something and makes it over here, then an actor comes in here, and it becomes this other thing, is usually very rewarding for me. And it's very rare I've been upset and think my work is being sort of badly treated, because frankly, it's like, I'm writing the next thing already, and it's like, you can only love these things so much and actually that's one of the odd things with Penny Dreadful. It's the longest love affair I've ever had with anything I've written, because most things you're like done, and the minute it's done, it's like dead to me. It's like that's it. I have to give my heart to something else. But Penny Dreadful, because I love the character so much, and the people I work with, has been an ongoing love affair.
But with Penny Dreadful, for the first time, if you don't want the director to do something, you can tell not
Correct.
to. Yeah. And how often do you use that veto?
Very, very rarely, because it's not my gift. And some of the biggest mistakes I've made on Penny Dreadful the first season was thinking I knew things I didn't, particularly in editing.
Give us an example, go on.
There was an episode that one of our really good directors directed, and there was a scene with all of our major characters in the Great Room, which is the big rooms from Malcolm's Mansion, if you know the show. And it was a long sort of exposition dialogue scene. And I thought I was going to get in there and be clever with editing. It's like, oh, we can move this, we got to spend more time on this, we get that point. And I completely mucked it up, and I realized I'm not an editor and I'm not a director. I have ideas and opinions about things, so we went back to what was there, because it was much more sensitively done, because this director and this editor had spent their life learning the nuances of what they did. It was correct arrogance of me to want to try to make it better, and it was wrong the way I went about doing it. So what I do now is I would go back to a director and editor and say, could you lead it more toward this. Don't tell them how to do it, just say, could we get more of this quality to it?
We're coming towards the end. Yes, hand has gone up again. Yes. We're getting a microphone across there.
I can project my voice. David Nevins from Showtime. I want to know.
When you're getting your last 2 scripts, I know.
I actually read. I read 7 this morning. It was fantastic.
Thank you.
Do you ever feel dry of ideas? Do you ever wake up in the morning and feel like, oh, I do not want to write today?
Never.
Unlike almost any writer I've ever worked with, you seem to be tireless.
No, but I love.
If you tell him episode 9 you're stuck on, then that'll
Yeah,
No, I'm not talking about that,
I'm
but
stuck at the end.
I find it a little unreal.
Honestly, I love writing. I love writing so much. I wrote my first play when I was 18, when I was in college, and I didn't know what the hell I was going to do with my life. I knew I wanted to be in theater, but I wasn't an actor. I wasn't a director. I couldn't design. And on a fluke, I took a playwriting class, and I'm almost like crying because, that year I wrote my first play, and I said, this is what I want to do the rest of my life. And every morning I wake up and I get to do it.
Never writer's block. Never anything resembling writer's block.
No. Frustration, so walk around the block, do some yoga, take a hike, but no, not really. Not that my writing's always good, but it's always there. But it's all, as you know, but it's always there.
Okay, yes, a hand has gone up just in the centre of the auditorium. If you keep it raised, just... Okay.
Just relevant pictures. You mentioned earlier on about the outline a lot. I was wondering if you could go into a bit more detail about the process.
Yeah, it's for something like for an historical piece like the play. No, I'll talk about. I'm doing Just Kids next with Patti Smith for David, in fact, for Showtime, and we're starting with an outline. And what I'm doing is I'm reading the book over and over and over, and every time I read it, I use a different color pen to take different notes in, and then I'll do sort of research on the period, and I listen to a lot of music, not just Patti's music, but music from the 70s, music from the period, and sort of do total immersion work. And then from that, I'll do, here's what I think the plot outline is, as detailed as I can possibly do it. And whether it's doing historical research or something like planning the next season of Penny Dreadful, it's just a very methodical plotting. It's very plotting process for me, but it's by little increments, fun, great things will emerge. It's never fully, the only fully formed thing I've ever had in my life was I wrote a play called Red about Mark Rothko. And it was because I walked into the Tate Modern in London, and I walked into the room with the Rothkos, and I said, this is a two-hander play. That's what this room is. That's what this has to be in my life. But I never had that happening. And then it was fucking years of research and writing. That was the only fully formed idea I've ever had.
And at that stage, when you're marking up with your different coloured pens in the book, are you getting scenes and bits of dialogue at that stage?
Yes, and I'll write down great scene, or don't forget this, or
Right.
dramatize this moment.
And even bits of dialogue?
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. And they go, what, in the margin or the...
Yeah, in the margin, or I keep a notebook.
Yeah. Okay, we're almost at the very end. Last chance that people aren't sitting in the George bar thinking, I wish I'd asked John Logan. You don't have to chase them down the street. No, suddenly you see it's always at the end. They go, 2 there, yes. We'll take those. The lady and then the first and then the gentleman.
Hi, I'm Patricia. I'm an aspiring script editor. But what was your inspiration to write Peter and Alice?
Oh, wow. Well, Peter and Alice came from...
We'll just explain again if people didn't see it. They're a tremendous play. But it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's about the real-life models for the characters of Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland, and they meet, which they, they didn't, did they?
They did, actually.
No, they did.
Yeah,
they meet in later life.
What it was about 20 years ago, I was in Adelaide, Australia, as you are, and I was reading, just on happenstance, I read this book called The Real Alice by Alice Liddell Hargreaves, who was the model for, Alice in Wonderland. And there was this one paragraph where it said, and interestingly, she met Peter Llewellyn Davies, who was the model for Peter Pan. They met at a bookstore opening. That was it. And I thought that was the most astounding thing. And so I just, for 20 years, I just turned that around saying, that has to be something that's really interesting. And then the play sort of evolved at thinking, about who were those characters, and then it was research, and reading about their lives and realizing one was blessed and one was cursed by their fictional counterparts, and that became a play, because plays are always about bam, and I thought that's an interesting dichotomy for a play.
And with the Rothko one, when you went into Tate Modern, do you panic someone has written this already? I mean, do you go and check if someone has?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I pay my mortgage with my writing, so yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, gentlemen.
I have the mic. David Garrett from Mr. Smith Entertainment. I'm an interloper from the film world.
As am I.
Going back to your observation about how the films in the middle ground have almost vanished. I mean, I have made that observation myself. There is a paucity of great material now. And I can understand why all great filmmakers have gravitated towards television. Do you see that coming back, or do you think that middle ground in filmmaking
That's a great question. You know what? It's one hates to be despairing, but you know, I look at the landscape of successful movies. The movies and the coinage of the realm in motion pictures is money or awards, and it sort of depresses me because I personally don't like big superhero movies, and I don't like movies for children that are marketed to adults. You know, but that's just me. So it does depress me, only because I came of age and learned my craft at a time where people cared about, you know, drama in rather a deeply unsettling way. And people are afraid to unsettle now at a certain level, I think.
Very last chance. Yes, gentleman there. Are you going to shout or wait for the microphone?
Yeah, I can start. I'm Colin from the BBC. So obviously a lot of people, well, I'm going to rephrase that. The TV and online content, so it's platforms are changing. I was wondering if you think that's going to happen with films, as in whereby cinemas start closing down, potentially in the future theatre as well.
Yes, for film, absolutely. I would say in 10 years, yes, that our appreciation of viewing as a collective entity, as an audience, will have changed so remarkably that film will be a different beast. Theatre now, because I think theatre is the act of communally, like a religious act, watching an altar. But yeah.
And in fact, really, theatre, I mean, definitely in Britain, but to some extent, probably less in America, but the predictions of the decline of theatre have proved wrong, that actually there's a greater and greater appetite for live theatre.
Well, I think so, because we're so disconnected now with our computers and our smartphones and this, and all those platforms that I hope you all watch Penny Dreadful on, but you know, that are attenuating us from the communal experience around the fire or around the TV. You know, people are always going to sort of want that, and that is the essence of theatre.
Good point. To end, the essence of television. I think it was a masterclass in the end, but anyway, thank you very much to